evening and welcome to our program, Jones and Company. I'm your host, Christian Jones, and joining us on this special edition of Jones and Company is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Chairman of the Progressive Liberal Party, the Honorable Fred Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, welcome to Jones and Company.
Great, nice to be back here.
Yes,
Forgive
sir.
my campaign attire, but I'm still recovering.
Yes, sir, that's fine. Let me start by congratulating you now. You're now the twice triumphant. You've been elected twice now as chairman of the party. Well, three times as chairman of the party. And how is that? How does that feel?
It's fine. It's a good job, and I've enjoyed it. And there's a lot of work to do. It was an unfortunate campaign. We didn't really expect to have one, but these things are what they are. So you just get to work, and the next job was dealing with the by-election, and that turned out to be fortunate for us as well. So you take one day at a time with this stuff, and you keep at it, and try and keep modest, keep your ambitions modest, keep your thoughts balanced, and not take yourself too seriously.
Right. And the timing for the convention, which happened just before this by-election in West Grand Bahama in Bimini, do you think it was helpful to the party as a time to be able to recalibrate, especially at the time when we saw that there were others that would have challenged your position as chairman of the party? And I remember the last night of the convention when everybody got up on the stage to hold hands and sing. And one of your challengers in the election, former Senator Robin Lyons, was standing right beside you, holding hands with you on stage. Do you think that that set the right tone in terms of unity going into the by-election? And then that proved also to be helpful to the Progressive Liberal Party in being victorious in this by-election?
Well, I'm not sure that scene in particular, but I think the convention itself provided a fillip for moving into the by-election campaign, no question, because all the razzmatazz that goes with the convention, the enthusiasm and energy, and that spilled over into the work which we had to do for the by-election. I can tell you, the Prime Minister and I were ruminating over this a couple of days ago. I guess it was just after the last rally in Bimini, which was last Monday night, and he was saying that the energy level really convinced him at that point that we had broken the back of the opposition to us in the campaign for the by-election. Right. So no question, the convention itself provided an energy level and a base from which to project ourselves going forward, and I think it worked.
Right. And do you think that the campaign for the by-election in West Grand Bahama and Bimini, was it a particularly challenging one?
Only in the sense that it reaffirmed our view that the negligence of the previous government was and is responsible to a great deal to the level of poverty which is in the society. Right. Now, one of the things you'll remember about, or may remember about what I say about government is that what makes the difference between success and failure is how well you're able to execute. And the danger we were in is 2 years in, people would start to say, it's not the past, it's not the problem of the past that we've brought into the issue. Fortunately, people did not buy into that because when we went into the constituency and saw the degree to which Vilma, Jean, Francis, Dorian damage still existed, and people had not had sufficient support to get back up on their feet, we realized the job we had to do, and started pulling out all the stops to make sure that that was rectified. And that's an issue across the country.
Right. In terms of the campaign promises that have been made, just in this by-election, we see where the Prime Minister was on the ground quite a bit with the candidate, Kingsley Smith, that he spoke to quite a few people, and he made some campaign promises for a new police station, for a new airport in Bimini, for a new hospital, I believe, in Grand Bahama. A lot of ambitious promises. Do you believe that before the next general election, that the Prime Minister will be able to deliver, that the government will be able to deliver on the majority of those promises made?
If not done, substantially completed. Those matters which were raised during the campaign were really already in train. They were not new. For example, the hospital, the financing for that's already been worked out, and they've done the spade work on setting it up and design and all the rest of that. So that wouldn't be a new promise for Grand Bahama.
Right.
Similarly, with the airport, that's a work in progress as well.
Right.
So these are not new promises. You know, there's a good chance. A couple of things will ride on it. One is, again, the ability of the public administration to execute all of this. Typically, there's a 3-year time lag between the time the cabinet makes a decision and the first shovel gets in the ground. God only knows why that is, but you know, that's the way it is in government. But you know, I think that all things being equal, you have a good chance of most of it getting started, if not completed, before the next election. And certainly we'll have a good platform to argue for re-election. Because one of the points that I've sought to make on behalf of the party in public is that this business of 5 years here, 5 years with the next person, it clearly has not served the country well. Right. So it's our job to try and convince voters that we need a second term to actually complete the stuff, so that you don't have another administration that comes in and says, I'm not doing what these fellas did, I'm stopping this. Right. So one of the things we were able to point out in the by-election campaign was that we had 3 buildings in West Grand Bahama, which was why the comment of former Prime Minister Ingram about neglect of the PLP was farcical, because George Weach Building, the Holmes Rock School, the Obi Wishcombe Complex in West Grand Bahama and Bimini were all started before we left office in 2017. We left office and came back 4.5 years later, and the F&M hadn't finished the buildings. They were all empty, no furniture, you know, contractors not paid, all of that stuff. So right. I think that served us well, that you know, projects had not been completed, and we would complete them.
Right. There have been people who have been, I guess, a bit skeptical, given the fact that there are reports or people are saying that the government is strapped for cash, that there are different employees of the government that are unable to be paid. Do you anticipate that, you know, these projects, that the government will have the funding in place to start them, to complete them?
Yeah, the issue of the monies being paid, those are largely administrative, as I'm advised. It doesn't have to do with whether we have the money or not. There are various administrative issues which are connected before you can actually spend money out of the Treasury. And again, this is one of the criticisms I've had, internal criticisms I've had, is that you know, we've got to fix that problem, because the person who is the recipient or the expected recipient of the cash doesn't want to hear a long story. You know, your administrative problems are not our problems, but it's not because we have a cash crunch. I think I'm advised that it's largely administrative, and I think we need to fix that issue. Yeah.
Right. And just to put a finer point on the issue you raised, with the comments made by the former Prime Minister, Mr. Hubert Ingram, and you had said something recently, I think in the past week and a half or so, that you would prefer if he adopted, you know, the position of, say, an elder statesman like former President George Bush, yeah. In terms of speaking, when he does speak, you know, to issues in a way that is constructive. I think in what we've heard from Mr. Ingram, especially in the past week, it seemed to be naked politics. But what did you make of most of what he said on the rally stage?
Well, I was surprised, because I thought he had moved to a position where, obviously he was in PLP, but where he thought that the policies of the government were, broadly speaking, good for the country. Right. And as a senior statesman, so to speak, he'd just stay out of it. So it was surprising that he jumped in with both feet on the public stage to support an obviously bad candidate. I mean, he's warned beforehand. For example, as soon as the name was chosen, we got a whole portfolio of the peccadillos of the candidate, right. Which were easy to exploit. So, for example, we went to, in Bimini when the results came out, you know, they were singing this song, "No broke man, no broke man, no broke man," which was a fair comment because the first thing out of his mouth was essentially, "I don't have any money, you know, don't come to me for money." Now, I want to talk about money in a second, but to get back to Mr. Ingram. So, to me, he should have refrained from doing it, which is some advice I gave another colleague of mine. You know, why do you want to drag your family and yourself back through this when you're done with this? Right. You know, all the world's a stage, Shakespeare says. We have entrances and exits, and the exit's done. So just leave it. The kids who are alive to date don't remember his prime ministership, so in the glow of it, you seem to be such a great guy. And occasionally you say one or two nice things to get yourself in the newspaper to remain relevant. Right. But then you put yourself feet first into this argument. And the first thing we said is, but you wrecked BTC. You can't get a decent phone call today because you sold this company, and it's the worst company in the Caribbean as a result of it. And the deal was obviously a bad deal for the Bahamas. Why do you want to get into that argument again? Right. But, you know, each one his own.
Right. I think that, you know, since Mr. Ingram's prime ministership, that the political landscape has changed a bit. And I think some of that is reflected in his rhetoric when you hear him on the rally stage. It's reminiscent of, you know, the way politics perhaps was 10, almost 15 years ago. But, you know, today we're dealing with, I think, different issues, and we're dealing with a greater amount of need in a lot of different constituencies than we've seen before. Mr. Ingram made one criticism about the Progressive Liberal Party's 2021 general election win, and that is that, you know, that your party won too big. Do you think that, you know, or do you share that assessment that that is a problem in Bahamian politics when a political party wins too big or receives too much of a mandate from the electorate?
Well, I thought that was actually farcical. I mean, the man who's taken advantage of large majorities himself making that point, and you suddenly find religion about large majorities. Okay, so let's put that aside. If you ask me as a political scientist, you know, if I were teaching at the University of the Bahamas, I would say that if you look at the results, whenever there are large majorities, they are inherently unstable because, of course, the person who's the leader of the party has to satisfy, there are too many mouths to feed. That's the way it looks, right? So when you look at Lyndon Pindling in 1977, you look at Ingram and his problems, and then Christie with the difficulties. That's a possibility which is more than theoretical. But, you know, I'm the chairman of the PLP, and I'll take any majority we get, whether it's a large one or a small one. All I want is 50% plus one, so that we're the government. Because once the government's in our hands, I think we're going to do a better job. So I think, you know, nice of him to say it, but, you know, irrelevant, not useful. I don't know what the point of it is. And obviously the electorate didn't buy it. As a matter of fact, they probably argued the opposite, which is that because the government has a majority, the majority it has, what's the point of, you know, electing one member of the opposition? Because he can't do anything or she can't do anything if they're elected. So probably worked against their interest.
Right. And what about the appearance made on the rally stage by another former leader, Mr. Tommy Turnquest? And it was funny to me, every time I see Mr. Turnquest make a return to, you know, frontline politics on behalf of the Free National Movement, it reminds me of a quote from David Cameron that he gave in his last PMQs in the House of Commons, where he remarked that I was the future once.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, Mr. Ingram himself disrespected Tommy Turnquest, essentially fired him as leader of the party from the public stage, undermined him even after he told him he wasn't coming back, and, you know, all of that. I mean, I just really feel sorry for them. I mean, that they had to go into the graveyard to drag these figures out in public again. Obviously, the result shows that there is a lack of credibility in them as public figures. And again, you know, Arthur Hanna said something to me a long time ago, and that is that, you know, age is not an issue. What is relevance to the times? And if you're relevant to the times, you know, you can be, you know, the Prime Minister of Malaysia was 94, and he was called back from opposition to lead the opposition. Right. he served until 97 and then retired again after he'd been prime minister, a generation earlier, right? So countries call on you on various times and for various occasions, but you've got to know. And this again, something I said to one of our own guys. Look, you know, you have to be able to objectify your behavior to this in the sense that you get a sense of where you are. You know, like for example, I try to understand. In certain instances, I'm a lightning rod on various issues, so I will stand back from that issue because I don't want to distract that from the party's general performance if that's going to damage the party. So everybody has to have that sense of judgment about themselves, to objectify their behavior and conform themselves to that. Now, branding is another thing which is important in politics. You try and develop your own brand. And not be subsumed in someone else's brand or try to be someone else. You try to be your own self. And the party itself is better served if people have individual bases, because they can bring a wide variety of bases to the one party tent. Right. And once you're all able to get along together, it's more successful in terms of the body politic. And I've tried to follow that example as well.
Right. And what about, you know, Mr. Ingram made the point about the large majorities and having to find a job for all of the various different people. And I see that more as a mechanism of controlling or getting people within the party to follow, to toe the party line, so to speak. But there have been people who have voiced concerns about that and what it means for democracy in the country. But what do you think?
Look, the system is what it is, okay? You can do several things under this present system if you want to change that. For example, you could put more members of parliament in the House of Assembly, right, so that there is a significant backbench, and that backbench can exercise more control over the executive. Right. But a prime minister is given the power under the Constitution to organize the politics and the administration the way he wishes or she wishes to do. Until you change the system, I don't really have any complaints about it. You see, for example, in Barbados, there is no opposition. I mean, I'm sure there was a point at which nobody anticipated that, but we've had that, let's see, Jamaica, 1980 was it, or 80, I believe, yeah, 1980. Okay. Michael Manley's party decided not to participate in the election because of a fight over the register. So they sat out the election. And then Keith Mitchell down in Grenada had 3 times as a government with no opposition. Right. And then now Barbados is on the 2nd time. But I'm sure when these constitutions were designed by the British, they were trying to mimic what happens in the UK. And no one ever figured out that, you know, you'd actually have 0 on the other side. But that's the way it happens. And there's no appetite in any of these countries. We'll see what happens in Jamaica shortly, but there's no appetite in any of these countries for the publics to change the constitutions we have. So I've ceased complaining about that. You know, I'm a Republican. I say it with a small r. That's what I want to do. Want for the country. But the way it's presently organized, that allows it. And as I said, if you want to have a more significant backbench, you have to increase the number of members of parliament. Then you can reduce the size of the executive. And again, it seems like a false complaint to me. Ingram used the powers himself to, you know, satisfy everybody. You know, I think that's where the expression "Gussie May cabinet" came from, is right. Under him. So, yeah, it's a bit
in '92, and he took advantage of winning the by-election in South Andrews.
Absolutely.
And then one even bigger in '97.
Absolutely, yeah.
But so, in terms of, and you talked about false complaints a moment ago, and there were a lot of outrageous accusations made by the opposition throughout this campaign, from stuffing T-shirts with thousands of dollars to, you know, all sorts of different things. Why do you think it is that, you know, those accusations were made? You, as chairman of the party, came out and denied all of those accusations. You insisted that if the leader of the opposition was that confident in those accusations, that he make a police report. But why do you think it is that those accusations were made?
Well, it sounds nice, you know, and of course, the newspapers, I blame, you know, because Candida Danes actually called me about this, and I said, well, you know, this is the usual problem. You know, basically, you're setting up an excuse for losing by saying, money is buying it. But I mean, there's a big surprise that money is an issue in politics. The Americans, it's actually a bit of a joke, but they say, there are two rules in politics in the United States. One is money. The mother's milk of politics is money. And number two is rule number one. So that's the way it is. Obama lost Philadelphia to Hillary Clinton. Black voters are in Philadelphia, but they didn't come out, and they determined no walking around money. That's the way it is. So I thought that Michael Pintard, as expert as he is as a politician, really misfired on that one, because this business of being so sanctimonious about money in politics without conceding anything with regard to it is, everybody knows that that's what lubricates the wheels in politics. It's a very expensive business. It had nothing to do with buying votes. But for example, if you have 10 voters who were registered in Bimini and they live in New Providence now when the by-election is called, and you've got to get them to Bimini, how are you going to get them there? You got to pay for an airline ticket, and they have no incentive to come. It's up to you to do it. So I mean, I just think it's a little too sanctimonious. People getting religion over something which is, not religious. This is politics, and it's expensive to fight a campaign. And I wish we'd all be frank about this and stop all this rubbish about, who's stuffing T-shirts, because there's no evidence of it. They, it's comical to hear the chair of the F&M say they have no concrete proof. So then, why are you saying it if you have no proof of it? They just believe it. Well, believe in Santa Claus too.
It's like the statement made this morning as well by the leader of the opposition that, the Prime Minister threatened people in West Grand Bahama and Bimini to vote for the Progressive Liberal Party.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And I mean, when you hear, I suppose, your political adversaries engage in personalities against the Prime Minister in that way and accusing him of those sorts of things, what is your response to that? Because it seems to me that, Mr. Pintard says that the Prime Minister threatened voters. Then he says what the Prime Minister says and says, well, I consider that to be a threat. Subjective, obviously, to his belief.
It is really sad. I think from a strategic point of view, and it's not for me to give advice to them, they would have been better placed had they listened to what is reportedly Hubert Ingram's first advice, which is to just sit it out. That was the advice which we got during the Elizabeth by-election, but I was saying, a major party has to compete in everything. But in '92, Ingram decided, I think that was in the winter of '92, when Irvin Knowles stepped down from the seat in Cat Island, he decided not to contest and put a straw man who ran as an independent, and they threw their resources behind them. And I can see from kind of strategic reasons why you want to do that, because one of the things you don't want to do is you don't want people to steal your supporters. So what you do is you are preserving your supporters, because you still go in there and you say, vote for this person, you're still present. But you don't get the damage which comes when the loss ensues. And of course, in '92, in the summer, they then participated in the general election.
So there's evidence, or at least history, of there being, or in that case, Mr. Ingram hedging that electoral liability.
And that's no doubt. I mean, he says that he didn't actually say what the newspaper said he said, but I'm saying that would be consistent with what we heard reported in the Tribune about his advice to them on whether they should participate in the election or not.
Well, one thing that concerns me, Mr. Mitchell, about politics today, and this by-election has been no exception, is the level of polarization we see in our country and the strident language used in politics today quite a bit. And it, I heard one time an interview with former cabinet minister Paul L. Adderley, the late Paul Adderley, and he says that there's no need for the strident language used in Parliament today. That definitely in the late '60s and early '70s, when they were fighting the UBP in the House of Assembly, that it was necessary then. But at this point, it probably hurts our country more than helps it. The level of tribalism we see in our country today politically.
Again, I'm of two minds about it in this sense. I've been the target of a salacious campaign, both the domestic campaign that we waged in the convention and the campaign since then with the by-election. But, I just slough it off because it just seems that that's what we do these days. And, I've told the younger politicians who come behind me, if you can't put up with it, then this is not the game for you. It's tough, and it can get pretty rough sometimes. And one of the things you do is, you try and isolate your family from it, but, they are in the public domain as well. So I can understand, everybody wants to use civil language, but it's not always possible to do so. And so I think recently one of the leaders of the COI, they have this habit of showing up with a camera, and this is how Lincoln Bain got his start with this controversy TV, running on the beach and people
flashing cameras in people's cars.
That's right, in flagrante delicto, and saying
Right.
all this stuff. So that's how he started out. So now they've turned it into politics, and you see Mills in Abaco and Daxon, who is running up and down with a camera. Well, I have a simple answer to this. I answer you right back. I don't care, and so people want you to be nice and civil and all the rest of it, right? The only thing I tried not to do on this last incident was to curse her out, but they're lucky because I was just on my best behavior because I just find it so disgusting that you have all this stuff you can do in terms of policy matters, which you can legitimately attack a government on. But the first thing you run to is talking nonsense about people's private life, all this rubbish, and making up stuff that's simply not true. But again, that appears to be part of the game. So if that's the game you want to play, I'm quite prepared to play that too.
You've intimated before, Mr. Mitchell, that a lot of the attacks against the Progressive Liberal Party in many cases are personalized against you. Is that true? Do you believe that?
I don't think a lot of the attacks are. I think that whenever I run for office, it's a convenient thing because of the prejudices which run in the society to just use it as a mechanism. The last two elections show is that on balance people reject that and they simply look at the work you do. So I try to pay attention to that. If people figure that that's going to get them somewhere, well, fine. But what I do say is that, to the younger politicians coming up, because it's pretty tough, and to my family, that this is all psychological. We're not at the point in the country where we're shooting one another with guns. So it's, as far as we know, it's just language now. And you just got to steel yourself psychologically against it because you know who you are or what you are and you know your work. And you just continue going with that. And so I'm not concerned about it, but I do think that our ethical and moral leaders, largely those who reside in the church, ought to be speaking more about standards and how we ought to be conducting ourselves in public life. I still do think that there's a set of language that you use in public life, and there's a set which you use in private life. And I think that one should not bleed into the next. I think there's a certain standard of public dialogue, but this is not a perfect world, and people do what they do, and you have to meet in the culture of our country nature abhors a vacuum. That's a general principle, because if you let the space go empty without answering, people tend to believe it and get distracted by it. So you try and respond to it in a way that smacks it back. But what I was also saying to my colleagues, another reason why I, as chair and defender of the party's reputation, respond is because very often supporters themselves are unaware of how to answer a particular attack. So what you're doing by responding in public is you're arming them with the words to use. So when they go to the rum shop at night and they're arguing with their friends, they know what to say because they heard the chairman say it. That's the answer to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you'd permit me, Mr. Mitchell, I'd like to take a break here. So we'll take this first break on our program, Jones and Company, and we'll be right back.